It is appropriate that I'm telling this story on my 30th birthday because 30 years ago, the United States Supreme Court overturned a rule in 1987 that prevented Native American tribes from holding gambling establishments on their reservations. So in the past 30 years, tribes that have built casinos have had this explosion in their economies. This has allowed them to afford to hire outside help to run the business, run the parts of the business that they don't or aren't able to do. And so I was part of that for a little while, about 10 years ago. And I was a cater waiter for an event firm that did all the events for a tribe out in the desert. I won't say which one. But the day after I was hired, the very first event that we had to do was a funeral. And I thought then, you might be thinking this now, that it was going to be so lovely to see the native rituals and all the wonderful multiculturalism that I was going to absorb with all the color and all the pageantry of how they're going to honor their spirits. But they were Catholic. They'd been Catholic since the 1800s when the Spanish missionaries went through the state and, you know, built all the missions. You remember from elementary school, and you made them out of sugar cubes. And this job in particular, I was setting up a lunch in the recreation center, which was just down the street from the church. I was there with Brian. We were unwrapping sandwiches. And the funeral director for the tribe burst in through the doors. He was dressed from head to toe in denim. He had aviator sunglasses and a cowboy hat. And he said, "Where are the pallbearers?" And we said, I don't know. We're unwrapping sandwiches. And he said, "Well, get out here. The service is about to start." And he seemed like he was in charge, so we followed him. And I should say that this tribe in particular, their reservation is out in the middle of the desert. It's at the base of a series of mountains, so it is always hot and it is always windy. So I was out there shielding my eyes from the dust and from the sun, and I was expecting to see the funeral director walking toward his hearse, but he wasn't. He was walking toward his pickup truck, and in the bed of the pickup truck was the casket that was going to be buried that afternoon. And I remember seeing a picture of the tribal council member who was going to be buried. He was a large man. I'm not exaggerating, weighed about 400 pounds. And the casket, as I was coming around to it, the long side, what I thought was the long side was actually the short side. The casket was practically square. It looked like they were burying a grand piano. And I'm saying that not to be mean, but just like put you in the frame of mind that I was in with all the bewildering things that I was about to see. The pallbearers show up. There are 12 of them. They are the biggest, beefiest, strongest looking men I've ever seen, because that's what you need to move that casket. And we all drove the 2 or 3 minutes up to the church. In the parking lot to the church, there were about 200 people. I don't know how they were going to fit into the church. The church was very small. It was one room with a steeple, and that was it. It was in the middle of a large dirt parking lot. Off to the side was a field with cows, and on the other side was a big pile of lumber. And I looked around and I noticed that all of the women who were filing into the church were very solemn. They looked at the ground and they didn't say anything to each other, not even say hi. And all of the men were doing that jock thing of like, oh, we can't stand around here in silence, got to give you a hard time, got to make a little joke here, got to slap you on the arm for no reason. And it's nice that the way that men deal with grief is the same across all cultures, isn't it? So everybody was going in. The pallbearers all came out, and they grabbed a hold of the casket and pulled it off the truck. And when they pulled it off the truck, it bounced up off of its axles about 10 inches. And the distance between the truck and the church was about 30 feet, and they were moving an inch an hour, just shuffling along under the full weight of this enormous thing. And by this point, everybody was in the church. We waited, we watched. And about halfway to the door, they stopped, all of them at the same time. And they looked at the church, and they looked down at the casket, and they looked at the church. And they realized, and I realized, and everybody realized at the exact same time that there was no way they were going to fit the casket through the front door of the church because it was only about 3 feet wide. It's the size of a door that you have in your house. And I think one of the pallbearers on the side tried to lift the casket up a little bit on the side to see, like, well, maybe if we put it through the door diagonally, like how you help your friends move a coffee table. And they decided not to do that. The funeral director hung his head and said, oh, God damn it, and walked on past, went into the church. He was only in there for about 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity just watching these guys quivering and beads of sweat rolling down their faces. It was me, it was Brian, it was the heat, it was the 12 guys, it was the wind, it was the dead guy, and 3 dogs that just sort of came out of nowhere and were wandering around the dirt parking lot, sniffing at the guy's feet, hiding, you know, finding shade under the casket, which terrified me because what if they dropped it? The funeral director came back out, he said something to one of the pallbearers, and like how I imagine you steer the Titanic, they slowly turned around with the casket to put it back into the pickup truck, and everybody started to come back out of the church. Oh my God, I thought. They canceled the funeral because they couldn't fit him in the building. It took me a while to realize they weren't going anywhere. Everybody gathered in a circle around the pickup truck, and the priest came out with his Bible. He stood next to the casket in the pickup truck, opened the Bible, and started the eulogy, you know, outside, like you do, next to a pickup truck. And I don't know how many of you are Catholic or have been to Catholic ceremonies, but this is not offensive to say because it's true. Catholic ceremonies take forever, and this just kept going on, and I could feel the back of my neck turning into beef jerky underneath the sun. And he finally began wrapping it up and asked everybody for a silent moment of prayer. And just over the roar of the wind, in this new silence, I heard, and just to my left, in the field, not 10 yards away, were 2 cows getting to know each other in the biblical sense. And this was happening next to the funeral, and my eyes were as big as dinner plates, and I was looking around like, is anybody going to do something about this? Nobody did anything. Nobody looked up. Nobody said a word. And that continued on, and the funeral continued on simultaneously in the same space for another few minutes. And finally it ended, everybody went back to the rec center and got sandwiches. And so death is a funny thing, because I think in the Western tradition of doing things, we are really afraid of death because it is coming. It's gonna come. We don't know when. We don't know where. We don't know how. But we hope it's a long way off. We don't know. So we distract ourselves with, like, we gotta have the church. We gotta get dressed. There's the choir. There's the flowers. There's the guy. And we throw the dirt in the thing. We go back to the people's house. We give them a casserole. We're very sorry for your loss, and we never talk about it again. I don't think it's a big surprise to say that death is a lot closer for Native Americans than for the average citizen of the United States, for many reasons. But this actually turned out to be really quite beautiful in retrospect, because it showed me that you can find grace, you can find dignity wherever you want to find it. And death doesn't need to be this terrifying thing if you kind of deal with it as something that happens in the course of life. And there's parts of the death process that you can ignore, like, 2 cows right over there, which looking back on it now I actually like, because it is, we were memorializing a dead person and watching new life being made, so it's the circle of life. Thank you.